History is full of fascinating events, but sometimes decisions were made that left everyone scratching their heads. Today, we're counting down some of history's biggest blunders and miscalculations in our "What Were They Thinking?" list. Without wasting time, let's dive right into it. In the Netherlands, tulip bulbs became the new must-have item. A frenzy of buying and selling ensued, fueled by speculation rather than the actual value of the flowers. New tulip varieties were particularly sought after, with some bulbs reaching prices crazier than diamonds. For example, a single bulb of the Semper Augustus variety could cost 10 times the annual salary of a skilled worker. This bubble eventually burst, leaving many people financially ruined. During the Crimean Wars Battle of Balaclava, British commanders issued unclear orders to their Light Brigade cavalry unit. The brigade bravely charged forward, but due to miscommunication and a confusing battlefield layout, they ended up directly facing a hail of enemy gunfire from heavily fortified Russian positions. The charge was a disaster, resulting in heavy casualties for the British. The poet Alfred Lord Tennyson famously immortalized this event in his poem, The Charge of the Light Brigade, which includes the line, "Theirs not to make reply, theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do and die." World War I saw horrific trench warfare, with soldiers facing machine guns, artillery, and barbed wire. The Battle of the Somme, fought on the Western Front between British and German forces, became synonymous with this brutal stalemate. On the first day alone, the British suffered over 57,000 casualties, the highest number in their military history. Despite massive losses, the British gained very little ground. The battle highlighted the futility of head-on assaults against entrenched positions in World War I. The Hindenburg was a colossal German airship, a marvel of technology that could carry passengers across the Atlantic Ocean. However, it used highly flammable hydrogen gas to provide lift. As the Hindenburg attempted to dock at a landing station in New Jersey during a thunderstorm, sparks ignited the leaking hydrogen, causing the entire airship to erupt in flames. The disaster was captured on live newsreels, shocking the world and marking the end of the era of passenger airships. Napoleon Bonaparte, a brilliant military leader, met his match when he invaded Russia in 1812. He underestimated the sheer size of Russia, the harsh winter conditions, and the determination of the Russian army. The Russians employed scorched earth tactics, burning crops and supplies as they retreated, leaving a devastated landscape for Napoleon's army to navigate. By the time Napoleon reached Moscow, the city was in flames, and his army was severely weakened. The retreat from Russia was a catastrophe, with hundreds of thousands of French soldiers dying from starvation, exposure, and battle. The Bay of Pigs was a failed attempt by the CIA to overthrow Fidel Castro, the communist leader of Cuba. The CIA trained Cuban exiles in guerrilla warfare and hoped they would spark a popular uprising against Castro's regime. However, the invasion force was too small and poorly equipped. The Cuban military quickly defeated the invaders, and the operation became a major foreign policy embarrassment for the United States. The Edsel was a new car launched by Ford Motors with high expectations. However, the car's design was boxy and unattractive, and the marketing campaign was confusing. Some people thought the name Edsel sounded too much like horsepower and diesel combined, creating negative associations. Ford also failed to identify a clear target market for the car. The Edsel became a symbol of a company failing to understand what consumers wanted. The Space Shuttle Challenger was a reusable spacecraft that promised a new era of space exploration. Tragically, on launch day, a critical safety issue with the rubber O-rings in the solid rocket boosters caused them to malfunction. The cold temperatures on launch day further compromised the O-rings' ability to seal properly. As the Challenger ascended, the leaking boosters caused a fiery explosion, destroying the spacecraft and killing all 7 crew members on board. The disaster exposed serious problems with NASA's decision-making process, particularly regarding prioritizing safety concerns raised by engineers. Mao Zedong, the leader of China, launched the Great Leap Forward, an ambitious campaign to rapidly transform China's economy from agricultural to industrial. The plan involved mass mobilization of peasants into large communes to boost agricultural production and industrial output. However, these policies were poorly planned and unrealistic. Millions of people were forced from their homes and into communes with inadequate resources. Food production plummeted, leading to a devastating famine that caused an estimated 15 to 50 million deaths. The RMS Titanic was a luxurious passenger liner touted as unsinkable due to its advanced watertight compartments and design. However, this overconfidence in the ship's safety led to inadequate lifeboat capacity. The Titanic struck an iceberg on its maiden voyage from Southampton to New York City. The damage caused the ship to sink rapidly in the frigid North Atlantic waters, because there weren't enough lifeboats for all passengers, especially those in third class. Over 1,500 people died. The disaster highlighted the need for stricter regulations on lifeboat capacity and safety measures at sea. King Louis XIV of France revoked the Edict of Nantes, a decree that had granted religious freedom to French Protestants, Hugenots, for nearly a century. This led to persecution of Hugenots, forcing many to flee France. France was a major European power, and the Hugenots were a significant minority contributing to the economy and society. Revoking religious freedom not only caused social unrest, but also led to a loss of skilled workers and entrepreneurs, weakening France economically. The Library of Alexandria, a vast repository of knowledge and scrolls containing ancient wisdom, was destroyed by fire. The exact cause remains unclear. The library was a treasure trove of human knowledge and culture. There are multiple theories for the fire, including accidental fire during Julius Caesar's civil war, deliberate destruction by Julius Caesar's forces to prevent the spread of Egyptian knowledge, or arson by Christians opposed to pagan learning. Regardless of the reason, the loss of this vast library was a major setback for the preservation and transmission of knowledge. Dutch colonists purchased Manhattan Island from the Lenape people for trinkets worth an estimated $24 in modern-day value. While the Dutch secured a valuable piece of land for a small price, they completely underestimated the island's future potential as a major port city. This short-sighted trade highlighted the vast difference in perceived value between the Europeans and the Lenape people. The passenger pigeon, once a North American bird species with a population estimated in the billions, was hunted to extinction by the late 19th century. Passenger pigeons were incredibly abundant, and their massive flocks were a source of easy food. However, a combination of factors like unregulated hunting, habitat loss, and lack of foresight regarding their population decline led to their rapid disappearance. In the 1930s, Western powers like Britain and France pursued a policy of appeasement towards Nazi Germany, hoping to avoid another world war by allowing Hitler to expand German territory. Appeasement ultimately emboldened Hitler and his expansionist ambitions. Fear of another devastating war clouded the judgment of Western leaders, who failed to recognize the true threat posed by the Nazi regime. This policy of appeasement proved ineffective and ultimately led to World War II. In the Trojan War, the Greeks built a giant hollow wooden horse and hid soldiers inside. They pretended to sail away, leaving the horse as an offering to the Trojans. The Trojans brought the horse inside their city walls, unknowingly admitting their enemy. At night, the Greek soldiers emerged from the horse and opened the city gates to the rest of the Greek army, who had sailed back under cover of darkness. Troy fell. This is a tricky one. The Trojan horse strategy was actually very effective, demonstrating Greek ingenuity and cunning in warfare. However, from the Trojan perspective, it was a huge lapse in judgment. They accepted a giant wooden horse from their enemy without suspicion, highlighting the dangers of trusting appearances and neglecting proper security measures. Facing financial difficulties and a desire to focus on Europe, Napoleon Bonaparte sold a vast territory known as the Louisiana Purchase to the United States for a mere $15 million. This deal doubled the size of the young nation. Napoleon likely underestimated the long-term value of the Louisiana territory. He needed funds for his European ambitions and saw the land as a drain on resources. The United States, on the other hand, saw a golden opportunity for expansion westward. Ireland's heavy reliance on a single crop, the potato, led to widespread famine when a potato blight devastated crops for several years. Millions suffered from starvation and disease, and many emigrated from Ireland. Irish dependence on a single crop exposed a major vulnerability in their agricultural system. Economic dependence on British landlords and social inequalities limited the ability of many Irish people to adapt or find alternative food sources. European powers competed for colonies in Africa, carving up the continent with little regard for existing tribal boundaries or the future consequences. This led to arbitrary borders, ethnic conflicts, and instability in many African nations. European colonialism was driven by greed and a desire for resources and markets. European powers ignored the social and political realities of Africa, prioritizing their own gain over the long-term well-being of the continent. This short-sighted approach had lasting negative consequences. In the midst of the Great Depression, thousands of World War I veterans descended on Washington, D.C., demanding early payment of a promised bonus for their wartime service. The bonus army set up camps and protested peacefully, but the government responded with force, using tear gas and military troops to disperse the veterans. The harsh government response to the bonus army protesters was a major public relations blunder. These were veterans who had served their country, and their plight during a time of economic hardship resonated with many Americans. Using force against them highlighted a lack of compassion and a disconnect between the government and its citizens. Ford released the Pinto with a design flaw that placed the fuel tank in a vulnerable position behind the rear axle. A rear-end collision could easily rupture the tank, leading to fires and explosions. This design decision resulted in numerous deaths and injuries. Prioritizing cost-cutting over safety is a major criticism of the Ford Pinto. The company knew about the design flaw but chose not to fix it due to the perceived cost of a recall. This disregard for safety had tragic consequences. The Treaty of Versailles imposed harsh penalties on Germany after World War I, including territorial losses, disarmament, and significant reparation payments. These harsh terms are seen by some historians as contributing to the rise of Nazism and World War II. The Treaty of Versailles was a punitive measure that sowed the seeds of future conflict. The resentment it created in Germany helped pave the way for Hitler's rise to power. It highlights the dangers of imposing overly harsh peace terms on a defeated nation. The Leaning Tower of Pisa began to tilt during construction due to unstable ground and a poor foundation design. Efforts have been made over the centuries to stabilize the tower and prevent its collapse. The Leaning Tower is a fascinating architectural anomaly, but its tilt was not intentional. The builders likely underestimated the challenges of constructing a tall structure on soft soil. This incident highlights the importance of conducting thorough soil analysis and using appropriate foundation designs for large buildings. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled in the Dred Scott case that African Americans, whether enslaved or free, were not citizens and had no legal standing to sue in federal court. This decision further inflamed tensions leading up to the Civil War. The Dred Scott decision was a blatant denial of basic human rights and a major step backward for racial equality. It highlights the deep-seated racism that existed in the U.S. prior to the Civil War. The U.S. government forcibly relocated Native American tribes, particularly the Cherokee, from their ancestral lands to Indian territory west of the Mississippi River. Thousands died during this forced migration. The Trail of Tears was a tragic episode of forced displacement and cultural destruction. Disregarding Native American land rights and resorting to violence had devastating consequences for indigenous people.